The early morning sun streamed through the sheer curtains of Barack Obama's quiet Chicago study. The room was filled with relics of a life lived in the spotlight, framed photos of his daughters, Malia and Sasha, a weathered Kenyan sculpture given to him by his late father's relatives, and an old campaign poster now yellowing with age. It had been years since he left the White House, and though the noise had quieted, a part of him had never stopped listening to the pulse of the world. Barack sipped his Kenyan coffee, flipping through a stack of letters on his desk. His assistant, Janelle, still forwarded messages deemed important or particularly moving. Most were invitations to speak or handwritten letters from hopeful young people across the globe. But one thick envelope stood out, an ornate seal of Burkina Faso pressed into its wax. He furrowed his brow. Burkina Faso? He whispered to himself. The name sparked a distant memory, an African country rich in culture and resilience, yet often marred by poverty, conflict, and foreign interference. Barack remembered its capital, Ouagadougou, and the fiery young president who had recently emerged as a symbol of a new Africa, Ibrahim Traoré. He sliced the envelope open, unfolding the thick parchment inside. At the top, elegantly handwritten in French and translated beneath in flawless English, was the title, "To the One Who Once Led the World." Barack sat up straighter. His fingers trembled slightly as he began to read. Mr. Barack Hussein Obama, I write to you not merely as the president of Burkina Faso, but as a son of Africa, like you. This letter may never be read by you. It may be discarded by an assistant or dismissed as posturing by diplomats. But if it finds your eyes, I ask only this. Read it not as a former president, but as a man, as a father, as a brother, as someone who once dared to hope. You were the first African-American president of the United States. I was just a boy when you took office. I remember watching you on a cracked television screen in my village with the older men shaking their heads in disbelief and the women weeping with joy. A son of Africa in the White House, they said. And I, young Ibrahim, believed the world had changed, that justice had begun to rise like the morning sun. But years later, I walked through the ruins of villages torn apart by drone strikes and watched my people bleed not only from bullets, but from debt, from hunger, from the silent war of exploitation. And I asked myself, where was the hope? This is not a letter of blame. This is not a trial. This is a call from one son of Africa to another. Our people are still in chains. Only now, the chains are made of contracts, not iron. They are forged in boardrooms, not slave ships. The faces of our colonizers have changed, their methods evolved, but their mission remains unchanged. Extract, exploit, and erase. And so I fight. I fight not because I hate the West, but because I love Africa. And I wonder, do you still feel that love burning inside you? You once said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But Mr. Obama, it does not bend on its own. It must be pulled, wrenched by calloused hands and courageous hearts. Will you help pull, or will you only remember? With respect and hope, Ibrahim Traoré, President, Burkina Faso. Barack's hands were shaking by the time he finished reading. He stared at the letter for a long moment, then slowly stood and walked over to the window. The city lay stretched out before him, beautiful and oblivious. Somewhere, halfway across the world, a young African leader had written him a letter not to accuse, but to awaken. It hit him deeper than any political critique ever had. This was personal. This was ancestral. That night, Barack couldn't sleep. He wandered his home in silence, his mind wrestling with emotions he thought he had long buried. his identity as a bridge between worlds, his father's ghostly presence, and the complicated legacy he had left behind. He remembered standing before the Lincoln Memorial the day before his inauguration. Malia was just 10, Sasha only 7. They had danced and laughed, unaware of the magnitude of the moment. And yet, even then, he had felt the weight of every black man, every African child, every hope-filled heart. Across the Atlantic, the African savanna burned gold under the setting sun. Ibrahim Traoré stood atop a simple platform, addressing a crowd of farmers, students, and elders. There were no flashy suits, no luxury vehicles, just the earth beneath them and the fire within them. He spoke in Mossi, then French, then English, so all could understand. We will not be silent in the face of theft masked as aid. We will not bow to corporations who rob our land while smiling for the camera. We are not beggars, we are builders, and Africa will rise, not by permission, but by power. The crowd erupted, but in his heart, Ibrahim thought of the letter he had sent. He didn't expect an answer. He knew silence well. Yet a part of him, a boy who had once believed in Obama's "Yes, we can," still waited. Back in Chicago, Michelle found Barack standing alone on the balcony, arms crossed, the wind catching the edge of the parchment letter still in his hand. "What's that?" she asked gently. Barack turned to her slowly, his eyes unusually distant. "It's from a young president in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré." Michelle raised an eyebrow. "The one who kicked out the French military and refused IMF terms?" He nodded. "Yeah, that one." She looked at him carefully. "What did he say?" Barack swallowed. His voice was low. "He reminded me who I used to be." Barack made a phone call the next day, to someone he hadn't spoken to in years. "John," he said, "I need a favor. I want to visit Burkina Faso. Quietly. No press." There was silence on the other end. Then the familiar, gravelly voice responded, "You're serious?" "As serious as I've ever been." News outlets buzzed with speculation as a private jet was seen landing in Ouagadougou under heavy secrecy. Neither the U.S. nor Burkina Faso confirmed the arrival, but whispers traveled fast. In villages and markets, elders said, "Obama has come." Young men and women, skeptical and sharp, asked, "Why now?" And in the presidential compound, Ibrahim Traoré stood at the edge of a garden, his hands folded behind his back, as a tall, thoughtful man approached him, eyes tired but burning with something old and familiar. "Mr. President," Traoré said quietly. Barack extended his hand. "Please, call me Barack." They shook hands, two sons of Africa, one from the dreams of yesterday, one from the fire of today, and neither knowing that this meeting would spark something that would shake the world. The air inside the presidential compound in Ouagadougou was thick with stillness. The sun outside beat down on the Sahel land, but inside the stone-walled room, time seemed to pause. Barack Obama sat across from Ibrahim Traoré, the two men separated only by a low wooden table carved by Burkinabe artisans. No aides, no cameras, just two leaders and the weight of two continents in the room. Barack broke the silence first. "I read your letter twice," he said, his voice steady but low. "Once with my mind, once with my heart." Ibrahim didn't respond immediately. He studied Obama's face, the deep lines that had grown since his presidency, the quiet wisdom, the weariness of a man who had carried too much for too long. Finally, Ibrahim said, "And which one believed me?" Obama's brow furrowed. "Both," he said honestly, "but one of them didn't want to." That answer made Ibrahim lean back, not out of disrespect, but reflection. "Then you understand why I wrote it." "I do," Obama said, "and it hurt." "It was meant to," Ibrahim replied without malice, "not to wound, but to wake." Obama nodded slowly. "You said something in your letter, about pulling the arc of the moral universe. He leaned forward. I believed, when I was president, that diplomacy, patience, working within the system, these were the right ways. That change could come from inside. Did it? Ibrahim asked, blunt. Did it really? Barack paused. The silence between them grew heavier. Some things changed, he said, but not enough. Not for Africa, not for the poor, not for the people crushed under the machinery I couldn't stop. Ibrahim looked down, clasping his hands. Then maybe it's time we stop fixing the system and start replacing it. With what? Obama asked. Revolution? With truth, Ibrahim said quietly. With self-respect. With sovereignty. With Africa standing on its feet, not its knees. Barack studied him. You're young, you're bold, but you've made enemies. The same kind I made. The ones in suits who don't bleed when bombs drop. How long do you think they'll let you keep this up? Long enough to wake my people, Ibrahim said, eyes blazing. Long enough to remind them we don't need permission to be free. For a moment, they were both quiet again. Then Barack asked the question that had been haunting him since the letter arrived. Do you think I failed you? Ibrahim didn't answer right away. Then he said, No, I think you forgot who you were. But I don't blame you. The system you entered was built to break men like us. So why didn't it break you? Barack asked. Ibrahim's reply was calm but powerful. Because I never asked it for approval. That answer hit Barack harder than any critique. He stood, walking slowly toward the window overlooking the courtyard. When I was elected, he began, I believed I was carrying the hopes of an entire people. Not just Black Americans, but Africans. I thought my victory meant their suffering would begin to matter. But somewhere along the line, I started playing defense, trying to keep the machine from getting worse, instead of tearing it down. He turned to face Ibrahim. And I wonder if I betrayed more than I saved. Ibrahim stood too, not out of respect for a title, but for a man reckoning with himself. Maybe you did, he said gently, but you're here now. The former president exhaled, as if shedding invisible chains. Then help me understand, not as a politician, as a brother. Ibrahim motioned toward a smaller room adjacent to the chamber. Come, he said, there's something I want to show you. They walked through a narrow corridor until they reached a dimly lit room with walls lined with photos. Black and white, color, some torn at the edges. Children with distended bellies. Women carrying water on their heads. Fields scorched by corporate extractors. And in the center, a portrait of Thomas Sankara, eyes full of defiance and love. These, Ibrahim said, gesturing around them, are the forgotten. Barack walked slowly, taking in the images. Every one of them, a story, he murmured. A warning, Ibrahim corrected, that when Africa is ignored, she bleeds, and when she is used, she dies quietly. Barack's eyes rested on a photograph of a teenage boy lying in rubble. Who was he? He asked. His name was Musa, Ibrahim said, 15, killed in a French airstrike aimed at terrorists. His only crime was trying to read under a tree. Barack's lips trembled. He closed his eyes. I tried. There was silence again, a deep, aching silence. Then Barack whispered, I'm sorry. Ibrahim didn't respond with forgiveness. He simply walked to the center of the room and picked up a folded cloth. Inside was a sheaf of documents, economic agreements, military pacts, colonial-era maps dividing African land like a butcher's diagram. This is the legacy we inherited, he said. And this, he pointed to himself, to Barack, is the moment we decide whether to end it or pass it on. Barack stared at the documents, the ink stains of imperialism still fresh in metaphor. He reached out and touched the edge. Then, let's end it, he said. Ibrahim raised an eyebrow. Words are wind. What will you do, Barack? The former president looked up, eyes moist. I don't know yet, but I will no longer be silent." He turned to leave, but paused. Then, slowly, unexpectedly, his shoulders began to shake. A quiet sob escaped him. "I thought I made a difference," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I thought I gave them hope, but I see now I gave them a story, not freedom." Ibrahim placed a hand on Barack's shoulder. "Sometimes," he said softly, "a story is the first spark." Barack wept openly then, not from shame, but release. Decades of pressure, expectation, and self-doubt pouring from him. And for the first time in years, he was not the world's leader. He was a man, a black man, a son of Africa, finally home. Outside, the wind shifted. The courtyard trees bent slightly eastward, as if something unseen had moved. Not a storm, not a war, but perhaps a turning of the arc. The jet sliced through the midnight sky like a silent whisper, the lights of Ouagadougou fading behind as Barack Obama sat in a dim cabin, hunched over a leather-bound journal he hadn't written in for years. The encounter with Ibrahim Traoré hadn't just stirred old memories, it had detonated something dormant, a truth that could no longer be ignored. For the first time since leaving office, he wasn't thinking in soundbites or political calculus. He was thinking like a man who had looked into the fire of a younger version of himself and realized he had once been a match, but had settled for warmth instead of setting anything ablaze. Somewhere over the Atlantic, as the plane glided toward Washington, Barack wrote one line in the journal. "The system I served is not broken. It was built this way." That night, he didn't sleep. By morning, news had leaked. A French journalist posted a graining image, Barack Obama in Burkina Faso. No U.S. press, no announcement, no official statement. Within hours, the story was everywhere. The headlines ranged from shocked admiration to suspicious fury. Obama visits controversial African leader in secret trip. Former president meets anti-West revolutionary. Why now? CIA monitoring unusual ties between Obama and Traoré. The White House remained silent. The Pentagon didn't comment. But behind closed doors, alarms were ringing. In a high-rise conference room in Langley, a former counterterrorism advisor looked across the table at a row of intelligence directors. "He's no longer playing by the old rules," she said, "and he's talking to the one man we've marked as a long-term threat." The room went quiet. Then a voice near the back said, "Obama has reach, influence. If he starts speaking Traoré's message to the West, we'll have a global uprising on our hands." A grim silence settled like fog. One of the men muttered, "Hope just became dangerous again." Meanwhile, in Washington, Barack walked into his home office and stared at the blinking cursor on his laptop. One article, one essay. That's all he planned to write. But it would not be an op-ed about policy or race relations or gentle philosophy. It would be a reckoning, a confession, a call. He titled it, "The Price of Power, What I Couldn't Say as President." The first paragraph burned. "I once told the world that we could bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. What I didn't say was that the hands holding that arc are often stained with blood, sometimes even mine." When it published on his personal website the next day, it crashed the servers within minutes. Millions read it. Thousands cried. Critics fumed. Young people lit candles in town squares across the world, in Ghana, in Brazil, in Ferguson, in Lagos, in Johannesburg, in Chicago. For the first time, the silence of a former president roared like thunder. But the empire doesn't sleep. The very next day, an orchestrated smear campaign exploded. Leaked diplomatic cables accused Traoré of harboring extremist sympathies. A U.S. senator called Obama's article deeply irresponsible. Major media networks ran edited clips of Traoré's speeches, painting him as volatile, radical, dangerous. Behind it all, corporate donors and defense contractors tightened their circles. The CEO of a major mineral conglomerate said bluntly to a group of investors, "If this African populist movement gains traction, we lose billions. Obama is giving it oxygen. Cut the oxygen." Barack, meanwhile, received a chilling message from an old contact. No greeting, no pleasantries, just a cryptic warning. They forgave you once. They won't do it twice. But something in him had already shifted. Michelle noticed it too. One evening, she found him on the back porch, watching the sunset with a strange calm. "You're not afraid?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes tired but resolute. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "But not of them, of being silent again." She nodded, stepping closer. "Then, don't go back to silence. Go forward with truth." Days later, Barack was invited to deliver a keynote address at a global youth summit in New York. Thousands of attendees, live-streamed to millions. Some expected the usual Obama charm, clever jokes, poetic optimism, calls for unity. But what they got instead was a reckoning. He stood tall on stage, gaze sweeping the crowd, and spoke words that stunned the world. "There are truths I could not say as president," he began, "but I will say them now. Africa is not poor." Within 48 hours, multiple agencies opened formal reviews into Barack's international communications. A senator accused him of undermining national interests. Anonymous sources hinted at foreign influence. But Barack didn't flinch, because something even more powerful had happened. People were rising. In Senegal, thousands marched with signs saying, "Africa will not kneel." In Oakland, activists projected Obama's quote on a city wall, "Hope without courage is a lie." And in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré stood before his people and held up a screen showing Barack's speech. "He heard us," he said, "now the world will." But not everyone was celebrating. In a secure facility outside Brussels, representatives from multiple Western nations met under the banner of strategic stability. The topic, containment of African nationalist movements. A British diplomat said, "If Traoré is allowed to lead this fire and Obama fans the flames, we lose control of the narrative, and with it, access to resources and influence." A quiet agreement was made. Surveillance would increase, pressure would be applied, allies would be warned, and, if necessary, containment would escalate. Back in the States, Barack was approached by a former advisor. "They're coming for you," she said, "and not with lawsuits or op-eds, with silence. They'll erase your message, cancel appearances, cut funding, slowly strangle the oxygen from your voice." Barack looked up from the page he was writing. "Then we give the oxygen back to the people." The next morning, a new organization launched, the Sankara Initiative. Led by Barack, funded by grassroots donations, with a mission to educate, mobilize, and expose the modern systems of neo-colonialism. The first livestream attracted over 10 million viewers. In the opening minute, Barack spoke directly to Ibrahim across the ocean. "You reminded me who I was. Now let me remind the world who we all can be." In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim watched the stream from a crowded room full of students. Tears rolled down the face of a young girl. An old man whispered, "Thomas is alive again." Ibrahim didn't smile. He just stood, picked up a microphone, and said, "Then let's set the world on fire." The night sky over Washington was unusually still, as if history itself were holding its breath. Inside a private residence on the outskirts of the city, Barack Obama stood by a window, staring at the flickering lights below. He had once watched the same horizon with pride, a young senator dreaming of change. Now, he looked with unease, knowing the system he had once upheld was now watching him, mapping his every step, his every word, waiting for him to make a mistake. But Barack wasn't hiding anymore. He had made his choice, and the fire he and Ibrahim Traoré had lit was now spreading like a storm across continents. The Sankara Initiative was no longer just an idea, it was a movement. Chapters had opened in over 30 countries, many led by youth who had never known a world without exploitation, but now dared to believe in one. From Soweto to Sao Paulo, from Chicago to Dakar, streets filled with chants, "We are the Ark." Protesters raised signs with Barack and Ibrahim's faces side by side, emblazoned with the words, "Truth, Courage, Liberation." But behind the celebration, shadows gathered. In a boardroom at NATO headquarters, a tall man in a navy blue suit pointed at a screen displaying satellite images of gold mines in Burkina Faso. "We're losing leverage," he said coldly. "Every week, Traoré nationalizes another resource. Foreign contractors are fleeing. We need a counter-narrative." A military official leaned forward. "Obama's the problem. His credibility gives Traoré legitimacy. Cut that off, and the fire dims." Back in the U.S., pressure mounted. Invitations to Barack's public appearances were abruptly canceled. His foundation was randomly audited. Major news outlets began shifting their tone, subtly questioning his motives. One anchor said, "It's concerning when former leaders become activists. Where does diplomacy end and provocation begin?" Even former allies distanced themselves. But Barack remained unfazed. "They fear words," he told Michelle one night, "because they know words spark people, and people can't be controlled forever." Then came the tipping point. A leaked intelligence report revealed plans by a foreign intelligence agency to disrupt Burkina Faso's communications and sow discontent through cyber attacks and false flag operations. The world saw it, and something snapped. In Nigeria, protesters occupied embassies. In London, students staged walkouts, waving Burkina Faso's flag. Even in France, young activists gathered outside the National Assembly and shouted, "Stop the plunder! Africa rises!" Traoré addressed his people live on national television. "They try to break us because they fear a free Africa," he declared. "But we are no longer alone. Our voices echo from Washington to Johannesburg. The arc is bending, and this time it bends on our terms." The speech went viral within hours. And then, something no one expected. Barack responded. From the steps of Howard University, surrounded by students, he gave what would be remembered as the flame speech. Cameras rolled as he stepped to the podium, no teleprompter, no notes, just fire in his chest and truth on his lips. "I was told to be safe, to stay quiet, to protect the legacy they gave me," he began. "But I didn't come from legacy. I came from struggle. From a father who watched colonial flags fall but never saw his homeland rise. From a mother who believed that empathy was power. From ancestors who sang freedom through chains. And today, I stand with a brother, President Ibrahim Traoré, who reminds the world what freedom sounds like when it's no longer asking." The crowd erupted. Barack raised his hand. "They call this dangerous. I call it overdue. They want you to believe Africa must wait, that justice must be delayed. But the youth of this world are not waiting anymore. And if standing beside that truth costs me everything, then I will pay it with joy, because I remember who I am, and I will not be silent again." The applause shook the ground. Videos of the speech hit 100 million views within a day. The flame could not be hidden. But flames attract wind. The very next day, Barack received a private message. Not from a government official, from someone inside the system, a friend who once sat in the Situation Room beside him. It was just one sentence. "They're preparing to remove Traoré." Barack stared at the message, his heart thundering. He knew what that meant. It wouldn't be an invasion, not in today's world. It would be a covert strike, an accidental explosion, an internal rebellion, a destabilizing operation masked as humanitarian intervention. He had seen it before. He had signed the orders himself years ago, under different names, different targets, but the same outcome: silence the voice, fracture the dream. He immediately called Ibrahim. The line was encrypted, the moment sacred. "They're coming," Barack said. Ibrahim didn't flinch. "Then let them find a lion." "You can still go underground," Barack offered. "Disappear until it passes." Ibrahim replied, "You taught me to speak. I will not whisper now." Barack paused. "Then let's speak together." What happened next stunned the world. Barack Obama and Ibrahim Traoré held a live joint global address, broadcast simultaneously across YouTube, TikTok, X, and Pan-African networks. No government could stop it. No algorithm could contain it. Millions watched as two men, divided by age, language, and origin, stood united in defiance. "To the people of the world," Barack said, "this is not just about Africa. This is about every system that feeds on silence and calls it peace. Every empire that profits from shadows." Ibrahim continued, "We do not call for violence. We call for vision, a new system, a new truth, where Africa is not a victim but a partner, where justice is not charity but balance." The transmission was cut in some countries. Social media throttled the reach. But it was too late. The arc had ignited. All across the globe, people organized under one banner, the ARC movement. A new generation of leaders stepped forward. Women in Senegal, farmers in Peru, youth in Detroit, artists in Palestine. Even soldiers in some African nations began refusing orders that echoed colonial strategies. The world was shifting. Then came the night of the attack. Just past midnight, a series of explosions rocked the edge of Ouagadougou. The official story claimed it was a gas leak, but those who knew better. Ibrahim survived, barely. His compound had been targeted. The attempt to silence him had failed, but just barely, and the world knew who had tried. In a hastily arranged press conference, Barack stepped before the cameras. "This," he said, holding up a photo of the blast site, "is what fear looks like. But let me tell you what courage looks like. It looks like a young African president who refused to kneel. It looks like a world waking up." He stared into the lens, not blinking. "I have been silent before. I will never be again. And I call on every former leader, every current leader, every citizen of conscience. Choose your side. The arc is bending. Decide if you will stand beneath it or try to break it." That night, a global petition demanding an international investigation into the attempted assassination reached 10 million signatures. Within 72 hours, dozens of governments called for sanctions, not on Burkina Faso, but on the powers behind the attack. And then something remarkable happened. A group of elders from across Africa, former freedom fighters, diplomats, tribal chiefs, gathered in Ouagadougou. They crowned Ibrahim Traoré with a symbolic title, the Flame Bearer, and they gave Barack Obama a name of their own, the Arc Walker, a man who had once walked the corridors of power, now walking beside the people. When the ceremony ended, Barack and Ibrahim stood together on a small balcony. No speeches, no cameras, just a quiet moment. "You know they'll never forgive you," Ibrahim said. Barack smiled softly. "I didn't ask them. I only asked myself." The final image the world would remember from that season wasn't a flag, or a riot, or a leader behind a podium. It was two black men standing shoulder to shoulder, one young, one older, staring into the dawn of a new era. And behind them, the people, not waiting, not begging, but rising.